Yep.
Yes, we can. All right, I'm going to call the meeting to order. Today is the organizational meeting for the Edina School Board, the January 6th, 2020 meeting. For old time's sake, we'll have the superintendent run through briefly the agenda.
Well, as you indicated, it is an organizational meeting, so tonight you elect the board chair and your board officers. Approval of minutes from previous meetings. Consent agenda has affirming appointments and some authorizations of financial financial things, and then designating depositories and newspaper. And then as an organizational plus, you have a discussion. John's going to talk about the revised 1920 budget, and then a discussion on board committees and their appointments, and then a discussion on policy 601.
All right, thank you. In case I didn't mention it, we do have a quorum. The first agenda item is the annual election of officers, and we start with the annual election of board chair. Are there any nominations for the office of board chair?
I'd like to nominate Erica Allenberg.
Okay. Erica Allenberg is nominated. Are there any other nominations for the office of board chair? And by the way, we're required to make multiple requests for those in the audience. Are there any other nominations for the office of board chair? Okay, if there's no further nominations, then the nominations for the office of board chair are closed. We will now proceed to a roll call.
Allenberg?
Aye.
Fox?
Aye.
Janie Shaw?
Aye.
Jones?
Aye.
Michelson?
Aye.
Green?
Aye.
Wallen Friedman?
Aye. Erica is the new chair. Congratulations, and you get the gavel. We're going to stay in our current seats for now.
Thank you, Lenny. Thank you, board. Now we're going to move on to the nominations for vice chair. Are there any nominations now for the office of vice chair?
I'd like to nominate Lenny Wallen-Friedman.
Lenny Wallen-Friedman is nominated for vice chair. Are there any other nominations for the office of vice chair? And are there any other nominations for the office of vice chair? If there are no other nominations for vice chair, then the nominations for vice chair are now closed. And again, we'll do a roll call vote for the office of vice chair.
Wallen Friedman?
Aye.
Green?
Aye.
Michelson?
Aye.
Jones?
Aye.
Shaw?
Aye.
Fox?
Aye.
Allenberg?
Aye.
7 ayes.
Lenny Wallen-Friedman is elected vice chair. And we'll continue with the election of board officers, and nominations are now open for the office of clerk. Are there any nominations for the office of clerk?
I'd like to nominate Ellen Jones.
Ellen Jones has been nominated for the office of clerk. Are there any other nominations for the office of clerk? And are there any other nominations for the office of clerk? If there are no other nominations for the office of clerk, then the nominations for the office of clerk are closed. And we'll do another roll call vote for the office of clerk.
Wallen Friedman?
Aye.
Green?
Aye.
Michelson?
Aye.
Jones?
Aye.
Shaw?
Aye.
Fox?
Aye.
Allenberg?
Aye. Ellen Jones is elected clerk. And we will continue with the election for the office of treasurer. Are there any nominations for the office of treasurer?
I'd like to nominate Matt Fox.
Matt Fox has been nominated for the office of treasurer. Are there any other nominations for the office of treasurer? Are there any other nominations for the office of treasurer? If there are no other nominations for the office of treasurer, then the nominations for the office of treasurer are closed. And now we'll have a roll call vote for the office of treasurer.
Wallen Friedman?
Aye.
Green?
Aye.
Michelson?
Aye.
Jones?
Aye.
Shaw?
Aye.
Fox?
Aye.
Allenberg?
Aye. Matthew Fox is elected treasurer. We'll now continue with the election of other board officers. Nominations are now open for the office of Assistant Treasurer. Are there nominations for the office of Assistant Treasurer?
I nominate Owen Michelson for Assistant Treasurer.
Are there any other nominations for the office of Assistant Treasurer? Are there any other nominations for the office of Assistant Treasurer? If there are no other nominations, then we will vote on the office of Assistant Treasurer by roll call.
Wallen Friedman,
Aye.
Green,
Aye.
Michelson,
Aye.
Jones,
Aye.
Shaw,
Aye.
Fox,
Aye.
Ellenberg.
Aye. Owen Michelson has been elected Assistant Treasurer, and we will now continue with the election of Assistant Clerk. Are there any nominations for the position of Assistant Clerk?
So I would nominate Julie Green and Janie Shaw for the 2 remaining Assistant Clerk slots.
There's been a nomination for the 2 remaining positions of Assistant Clerk for Julie Green and Janie Shaw. Are there any other nominations for the office of Assistant Clerk? Are there any other nominations for the office of Assistant or offices of Assistant Clerk? If there are no other nominations for the offices of Assistant Clerk, then the nominations are closed. We'll now vote on the offices of Assistant Clerk by roll call.
Wallen Friedman,
Aye.
Green,
Aye.
Michelson,
Aye.
Jones,
Aye.
Shaw,
Aye.
Fox,
Aye.
Ellenberg.
Aye. Julie Green and Janie Shaw have both been elected to the office of Assistant Clerk. And that concludes the portion of the meeting to elect officers for the board. Okay. Thank you, everyone. We're now going to move on to the portion of the meeting where we approve minutes. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes of the December 16th special meeting and the December 16th regular meeting?
So moved.
Can I get a second?
Erica, I'd like to pull out the 12-16 meeting minutes.
One second, I think
So
we
the
have
question is
a,
whether there's a second. If there isn't a second, then the motion doesn't go, and then we would deal with the pull-out request.
I'll second.
so all those in favor of approving the minutes of December 16th special meeting and December 16th regular meeting, actually, we need to do roll call vote. Oh, I'm sorry. Are there changes to the meeting minutes from December 16th and December 16th regular meeting?
Yes. Fairly simply, I'd like to change the, Member Jones made a motion to move the enrollment report from information to discussion. I'd like to scratch that to action and change that to action. The following minutes read, Member Patzloff seconded the motion. Discussion ensued regarding the district's, the report's historical detail, the plan board dashboard, and an overarching budgetary lens versus a more detailed view. I'd like to add to that, Member Jones stated she wanted to present as an action item that the school board would direct administration to reinstate the enrollment report that has been provided to the board in prior years instead of the new report. John Toop stated that it is possible for him to reinstate this report. So the only changes that I'm asking is that actually my motion was for action, and the sentence with respect to Member Jones stated she wanted to present as an action item that the school board would direct administration to reinstate the enrollment report that has been provided to the board in prior years instead of the new report. John Toop stated that it is possible for him to reinstate this report.
So
And I can pass that around to you guys if you want to see it. The red is the only thing that I'm asking you to act on. If you need to read it. And I have one prepared for the audience, but I actually only need you to see this. I'm not requesting anything else this time.
So it's a call for action that the next board meeting, there be an enrollment report?
I'm not, right now, we're just approving minutes, and I just wanted to
Okay.
add that to the minutes. So it's just the red that I'm saying I'd like to add to the minutes.
Okay.
Does anyone have an objection to adding the red content that Ellen wrote to the minutes from the December 16th regular meeting and changing the minutes of the December 16th regular meeting as written by Board Member Jones?
I do not have an objection.
So
don't
Lenny,
either.
would we vote on approving the minutes with the change?
Yes, we would approve the minutes with the change
With the
noted.
change as listed by?
Yes.
Okay. And then we would have to do a roll call vote of approving the minutes from December 16th board meeting and the December 16th special meeting with the sentence as listed.
Yeah, so you've got a motion pending to approve the minutes. You have asked for an editorial change. An editorial change has been requested. With no objection, we could just do a roll call vote approving the minutes with that editorial change.
Sure.
Okay.
Thank you.
Ready? Wallen Friedman,
Aye.
Green,
Aye.
Michelson,
Aye.
Jones,
Aye.
Shaw,
Aye.
Fox,
Aye.
Allenberg.
Aye. So the meeting minutes have been approved with the change as listed here, and so that will get updated. And then, John, will the new minutes be posted for the next meeting, or what's the protocol for that?
The new minutes.
Or just with the update?
Yeah, the changes, so Sarah will make the changes
Okay.
to the minutes, and then those will be.
Okay, thank you. So next, we normally have hearings from the members of the audience, but I don't believe we have had any requests tonight. Is that correct? No green forms filled out? Okay. Just to remind everyone, you're welcome to come and speak before the board. You can either request to speak online, or you can come the night of the meeting and fill out a green form, and you're welcome to speak. And we also have the time slot between 6:30 and 7 to speak. If you'd like to ask a question to the board or to the administration, it's more interactive session, so feel free to submit a question for that if you're interested in doing that. We're now going to move to our consent agenda, and are there any items to remove from the consent agenda? Or can I get a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second?
All those in favor of approving the consent agenda, we will approve through a roll call vote.
Wallen Friedman,
Aye.
Green,
Aye.
Michelson,
Aye.
Jones,
Aye.
Shaw,
Aye.
Aye. The consent agenda has been approved, and we'll move to our discussion items. I believe our first item up for discussion is the budget, and so we'll have John Toop come up and discuss the budget with us.
Good evening, newly elected Chair Allenberg and members of the board, Superintendent Schultz. Tonight, for discussion purposes, we're presenting the fiscal 1920 revised budget. We did have a fairly good discussion about the revised budget in the Finance Committee earlier today at 3 o'clock. I believe Director Friedman was there along with Director Fox. Just a couple of items on the 1920 revised budget. You'll see in the construction fund that there is a planned spend down of monies. We issued $24.9 million worth of long-term facilities maintenance bonds last spring. So we are starting to spend those dollars down during fiscal year 1920. And I see Zach has that up now. So on the other thing that I would mention is on the debt service fund, so towards the bottom of the page, Zach. We had a bond refunding that we did in October We refinanced the 2011B building bonds, and you'll see a separate line item for that. The refunding was a current refunding, meaning it all happens in the same fiscal year, so both the revenue and the expense is equal, and there will be no fund balance for the refunding bonds left at the end of 1920. Moving on to the top of the page where we get into the general fund. I would direct your attention down to the general fund unassigned line, because that's the most important line for the district. And let's see if I can read that here. Yeah, I can. On the far left column, you'll see audited balance, June 30th, 2019. And the number to look at is $6,764,615. So that's what our audited number was as presented by the auditors at the November meeting when they presented the audit. So as we did our revision, we are coming up with total revenues in the general fund unassigned. Now I'm just focusing on that line of about $99.8 million. That's in the white column. The gray columns are what the original budget was. So you can see those for comparison purposes. And then expenditures are $97,731,718. And we do have a fair amount of transfers where you can see up above we are subsidizing various programs in the district. And I'll give you an example. We just talked about it this morning in lead team. We have restricted for basic skills ML. We get $291,718 of revenue for the multi-language program, or ELL, ESL. It's called by a number of names. And our expenditures projected in there are $1,285,197. So that column where it's revised required transfers shows that difference between the revenue and expense. So that shows how much that the Edina School Board has chosen to subsidize that ELL program by. It follows the same methodology throughout there. So that amount in the revised required transfers column is $2,654,416. And if you start with our beginning fund balance of $6,764, add in the revenue, subtract the expense and the required transfers, so that's an expense as well. So we spend about $2.6 million subsidizing programs. You'll get to the final number of $6,157,761. So it's a slight decrease from our audited balance of $6,764,000. But the reason I wanted the board to see the gray columns is that's the original budget, and that's what Margot Bauk, our former Director of Business Services, was projecting. So you can see we're not too far off from that number as well. So I think I'll stop there and see if there are any questions.
Are we still at our 6%?
The $6,157,761 number, Director Michelson, will put us slightly below 6%. If everything in this budget comes out exactly the way it's written on the page, yes.
Okay, and we can recover and get it back to 6% fairly easily?
Yeah, you know, any recovery that we do, we have a couple of levers that we talked about in the Finance Committee that we can pull. If you won't see it tonight, but our enrollment report is a 19 student increase from last month, so that's a positive. We are offering more seats in the second semester at the high school, so I think that will be another positive to our enrollment. And the other thing that we talked about in the Finance Committee was we have been talking for a number of meetings now about having our a vendor purchase our cell towers in the form of a lump sum payment to the district. Right now, we currently get those dollars on a monthly basis, or one of the cell towers is a payment every 5 years. So we can monetize those as well in a lump sum payment for both of those cell towers. The numbers that are on the table right now are around the $300,000 to $350,000 amount. If you took that, if we can get that taken care of before the end of the year, and added that to the $6,157,000, we would be over 6%.
Thank you.
Good question, Erwin. This is Matt. We spent a good amount of time talking about this last
week and this week especially. So there is a commitment from the board and from the finance group to maintain a 6% capital reserve. So with John coming in, new in the department, we have been using very conservative projections and metrics. So for instance, on that cell phone tower, even though we have a high level of confidence that would come through, we're marking that at 0. So if contracts aren't in hand and signed, we don't count those. So going into this year, there are some revenue triggers. John mentioned enrollment, cell phone tower is another. There are a few other places we can look. And then there are some additional expenditure things that we'll look at on a monthly basis. Now that you're assistant treasurer, you'll be able to join me in that starting in February.
I'm excited about it.
I think this is a little bit of an aside from the 1920 revised budget, but my plan is to start putting in front of the school board a monthly report so that you can see exactly where we are. It'll be a high-level report, so you'll be able to see how we are trending for the school year that we're currently in. You'll be able to look back 1 year and 2 years, so you can see how that trend is going and, you know, what percent we're into the fiscal year versus what percent we're spent. And I'm really trying to focus more on expenditures on that report, but I want to start putting that in front of the board.
And I just want to add, it does say action on this. There's no action on this tonight. It's, this is your discussion, and then I believe it's placed on the consent agenda for the next week, next Monday.
Are there any other questions for John regarding this? Great, thank you, John.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to move down to the board committees, and this has been posted for everyone to look at. Does anyone have any comments or questions about the board committees and board assignments?
So Owen, I think you had a couple.
Yes. I would like to, I'm looking for MSBA, nominate Ellen for the chair of our MSBA liaison, as she is our LAC director. And I think it'd be fitting for her to be in that position because she's so close to our lobbying efforts on behalf of the district. We want to coincide with what's, be congruent with what MSBA is. And then I had a second one, and I'd like to be on the LAC still, but in a secondary role, and have Julie be the assistant chair of the LAC. So those are my recommendations.
Okay. So does the board have any issues with Ellen being the representative for MSBA and changing those around?
That's fine.
He said MSBA.
He said MSBA.
I meant AMSD.
AMSD?
Yes.
So you want to remove yourself from AMSD?
Yes, I want to remove myself.
Got it.
I'm sorry, Julie.
Oh, no. Do you want to remain an alternate or just?
I would
okay.
love to. Yeah, sorry about that confusion.
No, that's okay. Are there any other comments or questions?
Yeah, the form doesn't really show where the terms end for some of these, and so I think that it's a little bit unclear. Many of them end in the end of June, so I don't know how, I mean, it's not a really big deal on any of those. I'm currently serving a term on MSBA that should end in June. And I'd like to continue with that. It's not a big deal to me, though, if I'm an alternate or if I'm the delegate, but maybe we should, as a group, talk about how this is always going to come up, and maybe we want to change our own internal terms.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good idea. It is confusing because some are in June, some are around
Right, and so, I mean, so now it's unclear. Am I going to continue, is Julie going to start in June? Or, I mean, we made it very clear with AMSD.
Right.
So the way this is set up, Julie would take over effective now under MSBA, even though I kind of viewed this as when new people come in, we fill slots, but we also just take a look to see what changes make sense, even though it is, you're right, a June 30th term. So that's the way it is set up. It doesn't need to continue that way, but that's the way it's set up.
Right, and that's fine. I mean, I really don't care about that, but I do think that it's just.
I think you're right. I think it'd be very helpful to add when are the terms, and then if we're going to be changing it in the middle, it should be more clear. I agree with you.
More consistent with the term.
Right.
I'll have Sarah add the term ends on a column that just shows when the terms end. I think most of them are now, but I think there are some in the summer.
Yeah.
I think so. I think some of them coincide with the school year, and then some of them with
Right.
the elections.
Right.
Right. So that if you're a liaison to a school, it's kind of a little bit different to switch mid-year. I think that those are the ones that should definitely continue during the entire school year, all of the school site ones. The other ones, I'm not sure how important it is, because those could change at election or beginning of the year. I mean, again, if people have a strong preference, we can figure it out.
We can keep the defaults and just have exceptions, like this is an exception.
No, I think it's fine. I think what the changes that have been made are totally fine. I think it's just to your point. I think it'd be good to have more clarity in when the terms are up, and then if there's an election and it's going to shift things around, we could be more clear why and if that's going to impact terms or not. So, are there any other comments or feedback about this? No? Okay. I lost my notes about what we're talking about. Okay, we're going to move on to a discussion about Policy 601. Lenny, do you want to review this for the board?
Yeah, I've got some notes on this. So there's a number of reasons why Policy 601 is currently on the agenda. So at the November meeting, it was relatively clear that the creation of the policy didn't follow our normal process. As a result, we didn't have sufficient opportunity to discuss with administration and teachers whether this policy is best for the district as a whole, as well as the ramifications from adopting the policy. Best practices for our board encourages, if not requires, that at a minimum we consult with educational professionals prior to adoption of education policies. Our failure to do so creates questions as to whether the adopted policy best serves the needs of the students in our district. In my view, we're obligated as a board to always determine what best serves the needs of all the students in our district. In addition, it was also clear from letters we received from the incoming board members that a majority of the currently constituted board didn't favor adoption of Policy 601. At that November meeting, our administration stated that they would like the opportunity to work with the board on creating a new Policy 601, and that they believe they could provide input that would honor many of the concerns expressed by those supporting the policy. Prudence as well as best practices dictates that we should take advantage of our professionals and seek their guidance before fully implementing Policy 601. I'm also concerned that it's not possible to actually implement Policy 601 by the fall of 2020. So one example is the changes in the middle school. Those will likely require not just the creation of a couple new classes, they'll also require a completely new schedule and potentially a change to the middle school model. So given that background, I propose that we direct administration to put the implementation of section Roman numeral 5K of the current Policy 601 on hold. At the same time, we should direct administration to form a working team that will get input from teachers and administrators to bring to the board provisions to Policy 601 consistent with best practices. In making this recommendation, I want to be clear, I'm not advocating in any way for a reduction in options for our high achievers. Rather, I believe that there are better ways to provide more options for all of our students, and that we should do so only after receiving guidance from our professionals and only in a time frame that we can meet. So while we undertake those steps, I would also propose that the current board adopt a new policy 601 that mirrors the prior policy 601 in its entirety so we can avoid confusion as to the direction. So in summary, I would propose that we vote at the next meeting to put section 5, Roman numeral 5K on hold, and that schedule for discussion reinstituting the old policy 601. So those were my thoughts on policy 601 and the reasons for it. So I'm kind of curious as to where others are on this.
I'm sympathetic, Lenny, with your concerns that it may be a too aggressive a timeframe, and that the administration and implementers didn't get full voice on it, and I'd be really happy to entertain that and hear from them. I am pretty enthusiastic about the policy as approved in November. As I stated then, I can just reaffirm now that I think it meets a demand by the community. We have a disproportionately large number of gifted and talented students in the district. 80% of our kids tested 50% or above, and I think it's pedagogically sound. A lot of kids would love that. It would fulfill on a commitment we made to the gifted and talented community in November of 16, that we would have a more consistent GT offering at this point, I think January, February of 2020. We would be a little bit more consistent with our GT offerings throughout the middle school and not have drop-offs, and all of a sudden there's no accelerated class, enriched class in 6th and 7th and 8th grade, and LA 10 and LA 9. I think it provide more consistency internally and more consistency externally too. Many of our peer districts also have these programs. So, and you didn't bring this up, but one of the concerns has been the price, I think there's an overinterpretation of what we are trying to do. It would really leave untouched in many ways the elementary schools, and so it would be a lot less expensive than I think the administration was suggesting. So those are my general thoughts.
Can I just ask a question about clarification? So under, is it K, number 4, would that also be affected by what you're saying? The middle school is addressed in number 4.
Give me a second. K is under 5. So it's Roman numeral V5, sub K.
What page?
Sub K, then number 4 under K.
So this would be all of K.
It would be all of K, okay. Thank you.
Lenny, could you just explain what you had in mind with the process, both timeline and process for what you're proposing next?
So the timeline would be, tonight's the night for discussing whether we want to make a change. The January 13th meeting, if people wanted to make a change, i.e. putting it on hold, that would be the time that we would vote as an action item to put 5K on hold. And that would be a discussion item then for adopting a new policy 601, just for clarity's sake. And then the February meeting would be an action. We would then seek input from administration as quickly as we could for them to gather a team of people to provide input, because this is what they said in November, which is that they thought that they had ideas that would help supplement the policy. So I don't have a specific time frame, because since this is the current word of the board, I haven't spoken to administrators about any timing.
Okay, so 601 is up for policy review and was up this year for policy review. So this is not out of sequence. And I will take exception to the fact that there was some procedural error in the development of this. The policy committee did work with administration, at least within the policy committee, and did ask for feedback and did ask for it to be taken to teaching and learning. So I am going to push back on the fact that there was some procedural error in the development of this. I will say that we did not hear from administration until the day of the vote, despite the fact that it had been discussed since June in the policy committee meeting. And so I would like to hear more from the district teachers and staff with respect to what may be wrong with this, but I am going to I am going to push back on the fact that there was some procedural error. So with respect to this policy, I'm actually very excited about this policy. This is something that people have talked about for decades, and I think that it would both be an asset, a strategic asset for the community at a time when people are looking for whether or not Edina is committed to offering rigorous classes and programming for talented students. And so I'm actually, that was why at least I put it into the original drafts of the strategic plan, because it was to retain students and it was to attract students and especially serve all of our students, everyone else. So I'm actually very excited about maintaining this, and I understand that there are some concerns about whether or not operationally it's feasible with the capacity of our administration. So I can appreciate that and truly wished that they had been brought into our policy committee meetings, so we would have been able to say, well, let's look at our curriculum review schedule. And if we do, we would notice that right now we are on the final stages of our science review, where it will be implemented, our new science curriculum will be implemented in the fall. So at this stage, normally the board is looking, or has already, in the past we had said we wanted to see new course offerings in October. And so this, I'm curious about the timeline, because this does affect what is going on right now in curriculum review, for example, for science. And in science happens to be the course that Enriched Science 8 is one of the most popular of the enriched courses at the middle schools. At Southview, about 150 students sign up for Enriched Science. And so that is something that I'm quite engaged with, is to make sure that we are designing our curriculum this year to prepare students for next year. If this timeline is delayed, we are not giving the district the direction that I was hoping we would be able to give them. Currently at Southview, for example, about 50 students are signed up for the 6th grade accelerated class. So what happens with all of the other 100 students that typically take enriched science at Southview? You know, I'm just saying that now would be the time, where it would be efficient for our curriculum development team to be developing the enriched classes, or we are going to lose out on another subject within our curriculum development cycle. So that's one of my major points. Right now, we are in the process of stage 1 for curriculum review of language arts in the secondary. So it is very important. It's either stage 1 or stage 2. I think it might be even stage 2, where we are actually in that process of designing for those 2 new courses, and the only 2 new courses at the high school proposed by this policy. So, I am concerned about the timing that the board takes. This is something that should not, if this board decides to move forward with Lenny's proposal, I would make sure that there is a very tight timeline so that we don't miss the opportunity to incorporate any new course proposals into the current curriculum review. So that's one of my major points is I don't want to lose time with putting this off. A minor point is 601 contains our competencies, which we have not discussed as a boards for about a year. And that is something that we had talked about as a board that we would discuss as part of our strategic plan. It seems a bit unusual that we would be only, if we are going to be looking at this right now, not looking at competencies along with our comprehensive, our new comprehensive plan, strategic plan. So that's the other point. The third point I have is that there were several inaccurate statements in the administrative slideshow based, and I understand it, based on the fact that they were not communicating with the policy committee, so they didn't really understand what was being proposed. They had additional funds for teacher training, which we did not intend at all. We used the word qualified. We don't need additional certifications, and that was a total misbudget. There were several others with respect to the number of courses being proposed at the high school. New courses being proposed were only 2, not 10. The numbers that are embedded in that slideshow are inaccurate, and so yes, it would be good to get more accurate information out there. And the other aspect of this that everyone is seeming, is making it seem so unusual that the board would be considering adding an additional class at the high school at this time. I will remind you that in February of 2018, the administration came to the school board and recommended an additional class at the high school in language arts called AP Seminar. Their estimate for development costs for that class was $5,500, and it would be prepared and ready to go later that year. So I'm just saying that a lot of what I'm hearing, that this is a financial, incredible financial burden, and that the timeline is too tight. I think that we can discuss those things and fine-tune this policy, but I'm actually quite excited about this policy. I think it will attract and retain our students at Edina schools, and I think it would be a great way to serve their needs. So those are my points right now.
So I want to give everybody else a chance. I do have to note that I do respectfully disagree with you that this followed a normal process or even a correct process. and that input was sought. But we're just going to have to agree to disagree on that. And so I have other comments, but I'm going to let other people speak first.
No, I wanted to reiterate something similar, that you said that administration didn't communicate with the policy committee, and that's not factually correct nor fair to say. In fact, Lenny and I and Amir met multiple times, and Amir, being at the head of the policy committee, we asked him, and John asked him multiple times, do you want administration to come to the policy committee? And he said, no. At this point, we don't need administration to come to the policy committee. And we probably had 3-4 meetings where we went through the questions, and we said, and John's like, what do you need from administration? And he said, nothing at this point. And so I think it's incredibly unfair to say that administration was not communicating with the policy committee, because John and Amir, in front of Lenny and I, had many conversations in which Amir said, we don't need anything from the administration at this time, because we proposed, why don't we bring teaching and why don't we bring Randy to the policy committee? Why don't we bring teachers to the policy committee? And Amir said, no, not at this time. We don't want them at the policy committee. And so that's the direction that was given to our superintendent. And then we came to the full board multiple times and said, we need to talk to administration before we bring this to the full board. And multiple months in a row, the full board said, no, we are not interested. We want to bring this to vote. So not only was John given the instruction from the head of the policy committee that we're not interested in talking to administration, but the full board sent the message multiple times, because I brought it up. I said, we have to have a work session with our teachers and our administrators, and the board said no. I brought it up at a full board meeting, and I said we should not vote on this until we have multiple meetings, and you guys said no. You said we need to bring this to a vote. So I'm very unclear and frustrated that you're now telling me that we should have met with administrators when it was brought up time and time again that we need to hear from administrators and we need to hear, and you guys said, no, it's more important that we vote on this in December than that we hear from administrators. So it's very unclear to me why you would be frustrated.
Oh, I was on the policy committee, and for some reason, it deviated from a standard policy. So the policy, no, seriously, Lenny created an ad hoc committee with you and Erica and Amir to discuss something that...
The board created that because we all agreed we should create as a board. You were there as well, and so was Owen, and we all agreed. We have too many questions about this policy. We have too much stuff to grow through. We need to create an ad hoc committee to weed through all this stuff. That's how the ad hoc committee was created, completely separate from the policy committee.
Right. So, but why? Why, when it was brought up in the summertime, why wasn't the district administrators involved?
The policy that was passed was not brought up in the summertime. The first time that language appeared was like in late August.
It was, but we actually were talking about it. And
So
we
There
had
are
a
no
month
notes that
off.
reflect that.
So I am actually just going to reiterate, it was not this board member's intention to leave out the administration. And I will continue to say that we tried to go through the right policy, right procedure according to policy. And so I'm actually a little really frustrated that the normal procedure for a board would have the administration at least present to the board the meeting that it is being discussed and not the meeting that it is voted on. So that was...
Right, and we said,
Right, so maybe we're all frustrated, but I am incredibly frustrated that that didn't happen, so that we couldn't have made some of the changes that you are suggesting ought to be changed. But my main point is that I feel that there is a whole lot of good in this policy, because it can bring forth open and transparent discussion on what is it that we feel will retain and attract students to Edina and what will serve their needs the best. The other point that I was going to make is that many of the discussion points about financing the new programming specified in here was not very well detailed, and I think that if we are going to go into this next stage, I would really like to have a better understanding of the budgets for teaching and learning, because we can't just be stating that this is going to offset another program without really taking a look at what those budgets look like. And that's what I would be requesting if we're moving forward, that the board has a better understanding of the teaching and learning budget.
So I completely agree with what you said, and I agree with what you said, and this is why my suggestion is that this entire discussion is taken out of policy and put in our strategic plan, which is what I tried to get the board to do months ago, because we absolutely should have a discussion about how do we best meet the needs of all of our kids. How do we challenge and provide differentiation so that we are attracting students into our district, so we do have a robust gifted and talented program, so we are providing differentiation, so we do understand the budgetary parameters. We cannot solve those problems via policy. That is not the mechanism to solve those problems. You can't write policy to solve those problems. We have to start with the key question, which is how do we serve the educational best interest of all the students in our district? That has to be done via our strategic plan. And then, once we've done that, we absolutely have to make sure our policy backs up what we're doing. And I fully support what Lenny's suggesting, because we're going to keep writing and rewriting this policy and it's going to be a very convoluted process if we can't answer these questions as a board and an administration and make sure that we are creating programs that answer that question, as opposed to answering the question and creating a shell of a program and then making sure it's like backfitting and retrofitting. And I don't think we're going to get the best result that we want. And in the meantime, we've created this convoluted process that's not going to work. And so I actually agree with you, and I agree with you, and I think it will provide a more robust process for doing this. And I think it will send the message to the community if it's listed in the strategic plan, and it says, we as a community are absolutely committed to gifted and talented. We're committed to differentiation. And then it's incumbent on our administration to say, this is how we're going to do it. We're going to do it through the review cycle. We're going to do it through this. We're going to do it through that. And then it's our job to hold them accountable for that. And absolutely, we have to do all of those things. I just disagree that the best approach to take is to try to answer that through policy. I don't think you can do it.
Well, a couple things. We have two, I don't know if the public knows this, but we'll be meeting for 4 hours twice this week to talk about the strategic plan, so we can indeed bring it up at that point. I think that'd be very fitting for us to do it. And policy is an expression of our strategic plan and of our intentions, and so it would fit well into that. And what I see is we have an opportunity now to solidify some possible gains with gifted and talented and enriched learning. As Ellen mentioned, the science curriculum is coming up for review right now, and so the policy modifications are congruent with that. And so we could perhaps, Lenny, have a hybrid that we could preserve some of the changes in the 601 policy and preserve those aspects that are congruent with what's going on in the curriculum review cycle. And then we have the LA 10 and LA 9 classes in review, I think it's next year. And so we could put the deadline out instead of this coming fall to 18 months from now. And so we could perhaps take parts of what we've proposed, or actually what we approved with 601, keep those, and table the other things that, the other elements of the modifications to 601 that would be too time-consuming, or whatever adjective you want to apply to it.
So are you just proposing that we change the dates on some of the items in here? Is that
I'm
what you're
proposing
saying?
that we change the dates on the LA classes to a year out from now. So we're not talking this fall, but the following fall. And that actually is congruent with then the natural occurrence of when it would appear in the curriculum review cycle anyway. And so then we would be able to have a separate class for LA 9 and LA 10 in the fall of '21.
So again, I think I agree with what Erica said, which is the first step should be to finalize the strategic plan, which would then provide overall guidance. As I look at it, I think that there are better ways to attract and retain students than what Policy 601 has set forth. But one of my issues is I'm not comfortable making that decision without input from the professionals within our district. So I could give you all sorts of reasons why I think one pathway is better than another pathway, but I don't think it's my job to sit here and do that independently. And so to me, I'm not actually willing to keep any part of that 5K without input from the professionals that are going to talk about what's best overall for all students. Again, my personal opinion is that there are better ways to attract and retain, and there are opportunities that we are going to miss if we adopt that policy. But that's just my opinion. I'd want to talk to professionals and ask them. So merely changing the dates doesn't work for me, because it now, all we've done is change the date by which we, a board, have made an independent decision without input. And so that doesn't work from my perspective.
And I'll actually agree with that, Lenny, because I think especially when you're talking about the science curriculum, Owen, the middle school science class is the one that we heard pretty clearly from the educational leaders that would have a pretty dramatic ripple-down effect and could potentially change our model. So I think just leaving that as is because it's in a science curriculum review kind of goes against what the board heard back in November. So I'm in agreement with Lenny's suggestion. I think the educational leaders and the administration were pretty clear that as it's written currently, this is a domino effect that maybe we aren't ready for yet. And I think it warrants much more discussion.
So what I heard in November was that they were going to maintain the enriched classes that are currently being offered. So that would be 8th grade science, enriched 8th grade science. So I would expect that there would be still an enriched 8th grade science, and I would expect, as we had hoped as they design it, that it would be not that it would be at an honors level. So I'm just reiterating that that's what we as a board will be expecting from the administration. Even if we pull this out, this is the one that has the most immediate impact, and that we are not getting rid of an enriched class that we have. The policy indicates that we would want 2 others, 6th grade and 7th grade. And so what Lenny is proposing is that we would be reviewing this and not directing our administration to develop a 6th grade and 7th grade enriched class unless they feel that it is something that they are interested in developing. Is that what I'm hearing?
I would say that we would be directing them not to follow the directions of 601 to create a 6th and 7th grade science class. That is true. In terms of what happens for 6th and 7th grade, that depends upon the discussion with administration, teachers, and the board. So I don't have a prediction as to what those classes might look like. Because in fact, we might find that in science, that the compacted science and some other permutation of 6th and 7th grade science works better than starting to go towards enriched models. I just don't know, and one of the things we need is we need feedback on the compacted science, how many students are taking it, because I think it's 2 or 3 sections are taking it in one school and 2 in the other, and, you know, what metrics have we picked for analyzing it, and has it been deemed to be either a success or on the road to success? Without answering those, I'm not in a position to speculate as to what's the next step. I will say that I am not as tied as rigidly to the curriculum cycle, and I said this before, which is if we miss a curriculum cycle, but we believe that the best interest of the student is to create a new class out of cycle, then it's the board's job to find that out from administration and allocate additional funds for work outside the normal cycle. Because I think you had expressed the concern that if you don't do something now, you got to wait 10 years. And my view is if you don't do something now, but it makes sense in 2 years, then you have to just look at the budget and go, is that the way that we're going to allocate our funds? I don't know if I answered your question.
No, that's right. I just wanted to make sure that we had all understood what was said at the November meeting, that they were going to maintain those enriched classes. And so for 8th grade, and 8th grade science is the first one that is being currently going to be new in the fall of this year. So sometimes we all shake our heads at these meetings, but this one, we all understand that that's what we should be expecting. And there may be more. If people ask me, will there be a 6th grade and 7th grade enriched class, I will have to say no. If this is the action of the board, we don't know yet. And so I just wanted to make sure that I understood what was being verbalized here. Okay, we're all shaking our heads, yes.
Yes. That is my, and my expectation, or what I would like to see, is that regardless of what decision is made or what direction that we go, is that from John and the administration, teaching and learning, is that I think some of the anxiety in the community and from the board comes from the vagueness of the curriculum learning cycle and the vagueness of like the pathways and the vagueness, everything seems off in the ether. And what I would like to see is that, okay, we have language arts secondary curriculum review cycle. What does that actually mean? Does that mean that we will see new classes in what year? And we should be able to actually see on a calendar for the community to see that what does the curriculum review cycle actually mean? And then what does it mean for classes being developed? And when will, parents want to know, when are my students going to see that? That's what parents want to see. How is it going to affect my student and in what year? And I think that's what we owe the community, is if we're going to be reviewing and doing things through the curriculum review cycle, what does that actually mean from a practical perspective? And then as a board, if we see that and we don't think it's acceptable or fast enough, then we can say to you, you know what? That seems too far off. If we want to add something or do something, I really think we need to pull that forward. But right now I feel that there's a lot of swirling and stuff because there isn't a plan. Everything's out there.
I will agree that there are some things that seem to be out there. I mean, the talent development framework, there is no implementation plan on that. There's no real plan that states what is that going to look like. So yes, I completely agree, and I would like it to be a little less squishy. Policy 603 has a curriculum review cycle. It clearly states step 1, budget and review. So right now, in this school year, we are, the budget or review would be part of the science is in there. And next year, so I'm not sure if you've seen this and whether or not, we just revised it in April of 2019, so it should be fairly accurate.
Yeah, I've seen that. I more mean that communicating to the community, based on that, communicating in layman's terms to the community, if we have a science review cycle, that means as a board, if we are going to be talking about new classes, when does that even occur? Because it wouldn't be clear to me as a parent what that means and what it means for my child. And then if you are going to be changing curriculum, when would that affect my child? And so I'm talking about sort of translating that into almost like a project plan format for parents, and then helping us as a board make sure that things aren't too far off, because then some of them also based on when the state, for example, like the science, we pulled that ahead of the curriculum review cycle, and so, or for the one class, for the compacted class. So I think if you put it in a different format, as far as when classes would actually drop and when those conversations will begin, I think it could be helpful for the community to better understand, and for us maybe to understand when some of these decisions will be made.
I just want to add in, I'm also in support of moving Section K. One of the things that you brought up, Ellen, is the budget, and I think there are a lot of outstanding fiscal questions regarding the budget and the impact in the school programs. In November, when the administration and principals talked, and they said it would have impact on classes outside of that framework of adding just the pull-out additional academic classes, I would like to believe them and trust them that they need more work so they can see exactly what those impacts are. I think that's going to be a really important piece in determining what this policy looks like moving forward. And then second, the other piece of that policy that I think needs to it warrants a lot more discussion is even identification of gifted. And in there's a lot of room for interpretation on how do we identify someone who is gifted and talented? Is it self-identifying? Is it just test scores? Is it teacher recommendation? I don't know if we have the consistency through all of our schools right now currently that do that. You know, you look at, we heard from Katie Mahoney over at Highlands in November, and it would have a major impact on the CP program because they don't do pull-out currently. But according to that policy, they would have to then offer that. Additionally, you could have a class where if it's based on just test scores, you could have 3 kids that test into that, and they get their own class. Right? They would get their own class with their own teacher based on the policy the way that's currently written. And that's when I look at the impact, I think that there is a lot more behind the spirit of it. I think a commitment to and sending the message, the commitment to academic excellence and rigor in our schools is super important to make sure that it's part of our strategic plan, which I hope that this week when we meet we have 8 hours planned, that we can talk about that and make sure that that is a priority. It absolutely is. That's what I hear from the administration, and that they would be able to look at things and they have ideas on adjusting stuff, but I defer to the professionals on this and those kids, and they know our students. So that's where I stand on it.
Okay. Just to correct you on 2 points. One, this policy doesn't affect school choice, the K, any of the, this, because in school choice, gifted and talented programming is already handled differently for school choice programs. People who opt into those school programs know that they are handled slightly differently than in other programs. And then the other point about, gosh, what, you may have 2 points on, sorry.
Can I
I'll
ask-
think of it.
Can I ask a follow-up question
Yeah.
to that, Ellen?
Yeah.
So in a choice program, how are the gifted and talented students then, I mean, they're not separated out, as I understand?
It's just handled differently, and so this policy wouldn't really impact that at all, because the way this policy was written was to simply maintain what we are currently doing in standard elementary schools with gifted and talented. It was not meant to add any additional classes, just as, so my other point was going to be on class size, just as there are some things about class size that this doesn't supersede another policy that would say if we currently had 4 people sign up for enriched language arts at Southview, we would not offer that class, and we don't. So this policy doesn't deal with class size like that, because as you can see from the earlier section, it doesn't talk about class size.
I think we just identified a key actually issue with the policy and why our administrators are confused, because the policy actually specifically states the elementary schools will offer separate advanced learner pull-out classes in grades 3 to 5 for math and 4 to 6 for reading. So that's what we state our elementary schools will do, and it doesn't specify that it will be different for choice programs. And we heard from one of our administrators that said, you just wrote and are going to pass a policy that tells me to do something different than my current protocol. What am I supposed to do now? This dictates to me a change. And
that wasn't the intention.
but what you intend and what our policy states are 2 different things. So this is exactly why we have to do something about these words, because we now either have our elementary school administrators and teachers thinking, if I go by what our board just told me to do, I have to change the way I do gifted for our choice programs. And so we either need to change what this policy says so they don't do that, and this is exactly why I was concerned about passing the policy, because intention is great, but the policy says something different than your intention.
A statement of reassurance is that my kids went to Highlands, and that's the only elementary school that varies from not having pullouts. And at the time that my kids went, they had pullouts. And so Highlands has a lot of experience with doing that. So I think we could just fall back on previous models, and we could work out the language. And so, to your point, Erica, if there's some ambiguity in the language, we could work that out. In the case of the LA classes, 9 and 10, the district had decades of experience of having 2 separate classes, and so we're not reinventing the wheel. It's already happened before. But in a spirit of moving forward, Lenny, so if we were to talk about having the administrators come, I would be excited to have them come as soon as possible, and we could hear from them. We could not lose much time and strike while the iron's hot. So do you have any ideas about that?
No, because I don't have a time frame. I haven't had the opportunity to meet with administrators to arrange for their coming here, because there hasn't been any direction from the board.
I would like to propose that we have them come fairly soon, the next month, before we have our discussion, or next February, at the February board meeting. Is that possible?
So I don't know the answer, and we would have to define the question. And then the other thing that is upon us is the registration materials are going out. And so either the registration materials list these classes, or the registration materials do not list these classes. So implementation of 601 requires both registration issues as well as, at the middle school, scheduling issues in terms of the middle school model. I mean, there are a series of questions that were posed that we never got approval to answer. And so we'd have to go back to those questions. I can't give you a time frame. My interest would be to move as quickly as possible, but I don't have information for you.
Does anyone have any other questions or points they'd like to make? So it looks like based on the discussion, we'll have this on the agenda for the 13th meeting for action for delaying the implementation, and then discussion as a new policy for 601 as well on the 13th. So we'll be discussing this again on the 13th. And then we need to talk to administration about setting up a meeting, to your point, Owen, as quickly as possible, given the time constraints as far as class registration. And then I think it also would be relevant to talk about in the strategic plan. Maybe we can bring it up on Tuesday or Thursday as well. I think that's all for our discussion items, and we have no action items tonight. Do we have any leadership updates from you, John?
I don't.
No leadership updates? The only thing I wanted to mention, and I think Owen mentioned it before, was that we have 2 work sessions this week on strategic planning. One is on Tuesday and one is on Thursday, and I believe they're both from 5 till 9, if that's correct. And then we also have a work session on Monday before our regular board meeting, and we'll be talking about interventions and a time study, if anyone wants to join us for that. And then our regular board meeting, they're great. Our regular board meeting is Monday, the 13th. And that is all. If anyone, I think that's it. I believe that completes our meeting, and we are adjourned. Oh, are there any objections to adjourning? Sorry. Hearing that, we are adjourned. Thank you.